Hey everyone, welcome to our presentation. It's called 50 Shades of SDET. I'm Alex.
I'm Yermek. Together we have almost 20 years of test automation experience.
Right. And a short disclaimer. So this is not a tech talk. This is not a workshop. So you won't find a lot of technical details in this presentation, but we'll try to ensure that after this presentation, you will have a lot more questions than you had before it.
And if you are interested in more technical details, then you could scan this QR code, which leads to our YouTube playlist with our tech talks. And also, going further in our slides, you could find more QR codes with more details for each slide.
Yeah, and let's start with some questions. So ask yourself, do you fully understand what is SDET? And do you really understand what to expect from the engineers that take this role? And also, if you're working as an SDET right now, do you 100% sure that all the things you do right now fall under the definition of SDET on the market? And there are a lot of different questions and discussions around SDET. One of them is, should SDET be a part of development team or not? And actually, we won't cover all these questions fully in this presentation, but we will try to touch slightly all of them. And from our experience, SDET is like a samurai. So there is no goal for him, but there is only a path. And let's move a little bit back in history and try to remember where and when it all starts. So, Yermek, do you remember?
Yes, as that term stands for Software Development Engineer in Test, and this job title was first introduced by Microsoft in 2005. They said that testers are developers, which, among other things, also design tests, influence product design, conduct code review, root cause analysis, and write test automation. Amazon, Apple also use as that job title, while Google have another title called SET, Software Engineer in Test. And as that knowledge of software development is often focused on testability, robustness, and performance testing, and they usually play a contributory role in the creation of new software. In Ukraine, this hype was around 2017, 2020s, where a lot of companies introduced this job title and their career path. QA automation started to transition to SDET positions, and it was a hot topic in the test automation conferences at the time. And at that time, approximately, we are joined squad organization.
Yeah, and let's touch the topic of growth of SDET and Squad a little bit right now. For that, we will need some context. And let's start with the product that we're working with. So it's an Internet of Things product. We're working with physical devices. It's doorbells, indoor, outdoor cameras, smart lighting, security systems such as alarms and different sensors. And on the client side, you have Android and iOS applications, and all these things together, they are connected with the cloud backend. And our team actually grew from 2 engineers to 50 plus in 5 years. Several departments were formed during this time. And actually, this is a reference to the name of our presentation, like 50 Shades of SDET, as we have 50 plus engineers and in different departments. And all of them share the same role, but the focus is different. So these are the shades. And if you want a little bit more information about the technical challenges we faced in our path, there is a link in the QR code, so you can watch more there. And yeah, so there are specializations in our departments, and let's see how they formed. So everything started with one team. So there were not so many engineers in it, and the product wasn't as developed as it is right now. Not as much hardware products, not as rich application in scope of features, and we were able to cover all the bits of the systems together as a one team. But time goes and changes come.
Yeah, changes are inevitable. In our case, one of the organizational changes triggered our evolution. The responsibility over a backend and app divided. It resulted in teams movement and ownership transfer, so we had to react to these challenges. So initially, we had one monolith test automation framework which covered all backend services and mobile app. There were tens of different modules and a lot of dependencies, so we started to extract common modules and put each dependency in a separate repository. As a result, we divided backend testing and mobile testing in a separate frameworks. Backend covered streaming and performance functional testing, and mobile also covered functional testing and end-to-end testing.
Yeah, so I work closer with mobile part, and we'll start with it, and then we'll go further to cloud. Um, so imagine you have to test one hardware device, and you want to automate its end-to-end flows, for example, setup or different major features. So you have to control this device somehow, and you'll need a microcontroller for that. And if you want to automate this setup flow, for example, you'll need a mobile phone. And for that, you'll need to control the mobile phone too. And we'll need some executor for that. And you also want to have some test infrastructure and reporting and so on. So you'll need to have some cloud stuff in this situation. And everything seems feasible. And we remember that we had not a lot of engineers that are working on everything all together. But the story is different when you have a lot of hardware devices and you have to develop and support all this kind of tests, and you have to spend time, resources, and so on. And if you're trying to work on all of it together, it's becoming a mind-blowing experience if you're trying to do it along with other stuff. That's why we decided to split our teams into two parts, and one of the teams, uh, it's called like teams that was focused on mobile clients, and the other part, it actually was responsible for the uh, end-to-end test automation that involved all these interactions between different devices and developing all the infrastructure for that. But that's not the end. So let's imagine that we're living in this small little house on a cute tree. But one day we have a dream, and our dream is about something bigger, something more, uh, something more, right? And in this scenario, uh, we have a huge building that requires something that this little house is missing. And actually, that's a basement. And this analogy applies to a lot of things in the world, as well as to the processes in development and test automation. And this is the experience we faced. And let's see. So we had a situation where we had the development teams, and they had some abstract names, and the responsibility they had, it was actually shared, and that was a mess from our perspective, because you never know what test cases are owned by what team and what bugs will be fixed by what team, and if a new feature comes, who will take this feature. And for automation, it was a pain, and yeah, it was actually a really, really problematic experience. But there was a lucky day when the ownership was split, and team AB, it was responsible for the feature AB, and for example, team E was responsible for feature E. And actually, that's an ideal situation when you can predict where new features go, who is responsible for them, who is responsible for manual test cases, and that actually is a basement for the automation. And we were happy to introduce SDETs into these development teams so that they could focus on the needs of these feature teams and be responsible for the automation there. So actually, it formed another team in our department. It's stats and feature teams, and these guys, they actually are pretty much the same, but a little bit different in some ways. So, for example, some features are more are more some features need to have more testing in scope of functional testing. Some features need to be tested in scope of visual and maybe performance. And these guys, they have like different approaches, different tools for test automation. But when the release comes, they need to report as one. And actually, someone has to back these guys up with reporting, with common automation of their routine work, and also with some test automation frameworks. And yeah, there is a separate team for that. So these guys work on development of framework and common functionalities. They automate reporting and also some analytics that is being collected while guys are working. And also, whenever a new testing type needs to be done, the guys take R&D on themselves, and then they just release some common functionalities that can be used by these feature teams. And so there is a separate direction in our activities, and it's called tooling and process automation. A little bit more about them on the YouTube, but that's not all. And we had another and the last team in our department. And let's imagine that we need to build something like that. So I'm not sure that you are building this once a year or once or in 2 years. And this thing requires a lot of special equipment. And actually, this applies to test automation too. When you work with some product that is based on different new hardware devices and involves a lot of integrations, you eventually need to create some new tools or some systems that will help you in your daily work to do test automation better and to make quality of your product higher. And yeah, so we have a lot of laboratories that need to be maintained and developed too. And this team is called Core and Infrastructure. So guys develop and maintain infrastructure for laboratories, work on some specific solutions for performance or profiling testing, create different brokers and other standalone services that help us in our like day-to-day work. Right, and let's sum up. That's the current structure of mobile automation department that we have. So we can move to the cloud part.
Yeah, for cloud, it's a little bit different because for mobile we have dozen different development teams working on the single app with common release cycle, while on the backend side we have also many teams which owns one or few services each. So it was natural to divide test automation for each service because each service has own release cycle and we had many releases during the week. So we started to extract SDKs, which helps to interact with the service, and functional test for each service in the separate repository. And as I said, each service has own development cycle. So our next challenge was to integrate our test automation into delivery pipelines to enable faster feedback for developers and faster release cycles. And the concept of these teams is that each team owns the service, is responsible for development, testing, release, and maintenance. So testing became a part of development team. So developers need to write unit tests, integration tests, performance tests. So some SDETs transferred to developers positions, to SDEs, and other to DevOps positions. But the nature of our backend services is complex. We're dealing with video and audio streaming, and it is hard to automate such services 100%. So we still have manual testing to confirm that everything works for the end user after the new version of the backend service is deployed. So in order to automate that, we tried to reuse the solutions and labs that we had on mobile and firmware parts sites, and we developed end-to-end tests with real devices, which we run after the new version of the backend service deployed to environment. And we added it as an additional step in the pipelines to check, to confirm that everything works after deployment to production or release environments. So this is briefly our evolution in the cloud side.
Yeah, and let's speak a little bit about the current role of SDET and the main skills that the engineer need to share. So the first one is communication, because let's imagine a situation where a new device is going to be produced and released to the market, and you are the one who is responsible for test automation of in scope of development cycle of this product. So you have to figure out what are the key features for this product. Are they the same as for the previous ones, or maybe they are not? Are they implemented the same way or differently? And you have to communicate with developers, QAs, QA managers, TPMs as for the release schedule, some timelines, and so on. And you have to, based on that, you have to make a lot of different decisions in your work. So where you apply your testing, how you're reporting, what you do test, what you don't. And so in this situation, communication is the key. And that's why one of the main skills it is communication.
Yeah, and the other key skill is ensure that we have a good quality. Of course, it's all about quality assurance. So let's take, for example, that we successfully launched our new device on the market, and customer bought it in the store after a while, and he brings it home and tries to set up. So setup process is pretty much the same as the setup of your robot vacuum cleaner at home. So you install an app, scan QR code, pair your device with an app, and then you're able to manage your device from the mobile application. And the firmware updates over the year after that. So in our case, user tries to set up a new device and fails. What possibly could go wrong? It's a new device, everything tested. So the problem is that since the device was produced, the version of firmware has changed, the version of mobile app has changed. So it's all about changes. The thing is that when the device is produced, it has a mass production firmware version. And since it is not updated because it wasn't online, it wasn't paired to any user. But when the user installs an app, he installs the latest version from the App Store. And it might be the case that the recent latest app doesn't work with the firmware, and no one thought about that before. So in order to test it, we need to test how our app working with each version of this mass production firmware. And no one did that, and no one owned that. So we brought this thing up, and we introduced this process into the app releases. And also, it's all about test automation frameworks and tools, as that's developing frameworks and tools. And if we take that example of setting up a new device further, then it's pretty hard to automate it because you need to have a QR code, you need to scan it. And in order to do that, we developed an app which generates QR code. We placed one phone in front of another, and the other phone is able to scan QR code. And after the setup, we also printed these OK letters in front of and put them in front of our devices. And we able to recognize this picture and see if we are able to recognize these OK letters. And that way we confirm that setup went well, successful. In order to do this, we have labs. We need to manage all these phones, physical devices, real devices. We need to manage user accounts. So we created a bunch of different tools and services for that. And more details you could find using the QR codes on the screen.
Yeah, another skill is to develop and maintain laboratories, and not only develop to maintain them, but to also use them in order to ensure that they help you in your day-to-day work when you're trying to test your products and make them better. So, but there are not a lot of out-of-the-box solutions for the things that we need. For example, managing mobile phones or managing hardware devices, such as we have in production. That's why you need to do it by your own. And in this case, SDETs are responsible for development and management infrastructure for laboratories, managing stands, and also like creating some infrastructure for monitoring these laboratories and ensuring that hundreds of different hardware devices that you have there, they are healthy and they're ready to be tested, or they're ready for testing activities. And also there are some technical details in our talks on YouTube. So if you want to know more, just use the links in the QR codes. And the other skill that is really important is to be able to bring some new stuff, bring some new ideas into your work. So it's research and development, research and investigation. So, for example, when you have a hardware device and you need to test the protocol of communication between mobile phone and hardware device. Sometimes it's hard to replicate some negative scenarios or when something goes wrong, or maybe edge cases with all the real hardware. And you need to emulate it in some way. So, for example, we had this problem and we solved it like creating hardware mock for our hardware device so that we can test the protocol of communication between mobile phone and hardware device in whatever way we need. Yeah.
And last but not least skill that our SDET have is training and mentorship. In order for test automation to scale, we need a lot of engineers able to contribute to it. So we trained our developers and QAs on test automation. Actually, our QAs are very motivated and want to learn these skills. So during the last 3 years, we trained a lot of QAs. And as a result, we have much better communication with our QAs. They write test case with the test automation in mind from the first place. and they contribute regularly on a monthly basis into the test automation. They write test automation scripts, and actually, three QAs moved to SDET positions during this time. There's a question, of course, are they really SDETs? But what they have product knowledge, the context, the processes, and also they obtained the technical skills, and eventually they become good SDETs, and we have good examples of that. Which brings the question, what is the difference between the SDETs and QA automation role? Because many of us started as QA, so QA automation, but now we are SDETs. So we think that the difference is the following. SDETs are very close to developers because the main activity that we do, we develop code. Alex?
Yeah, and the other thing is when you're working as an SDET, you have to have this so-called helicopter view. So you need to know how the system work all together, how they integrate, and also you have to have detailed knowledge about how the components work, uh, and also be able to create some new tooling or new systems that you will use in your daily work during your test automation activities.
So it's simply about creating frameworks and tools and have deep understanding about the whole process of software development, all the release cycle. And on the other hand, QAs are using the existing frameworks and tools in order to write test scripts, automate test cases. And in our organization, we don't have QA automation role. QA automation is a responsibility also of our QAs. They contribute to test automation by writing new test automation scripts. And as that job is in between QA, SDE, and also DevOps, because we also create infrastructure, we develop infrastructure as a code, we manage infrastructure for our test automation. So we are in between these two roles.
Yeah, and we are moving to the end of our presentation, so let's take a little bit, like look back on what we said and try to sum up everything all together.
Yes, if we look back in the beginning of 2000s, nothing changed a lot because the definition of software development engineering test is still actual. Software development engineers and test develop frameworks, tools, and influence product quality on different levels.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, as we all know, no one wakes up early in the morning with a dream of becoming an SDET, and you are not choosing this role, but this role chooses you. So with that, you gain an unlimited opportunities of impacting the quality of the product and the development of the product, as well as learning new stuff and develop technically.
Yes, and no one regrets choosing the SDET role, at least in our organization. And from our perspective, there are few startups have SDET vacancies, while big tech companies have a lot of SDET positions open. And SDET is a sign of mature uh, product. So that's why we are hiring. We have open positions of SDET engineers in Java and Python stacks.
Yeah, and there are links to our LinkedIn profiles in case you'd like to ask some questions or maybe just have some good discussion. Please write us there. We're always happy to communicate. And again, the last one is the link to our playlist on YouTube. So there are some technical details, technical talks there regarding our work. And that's pretty much it. So
Thanks for your attention.
yeah, thank you. Have a great day.